The cases that really trouble me is the ones where I actually see innocent people being convicted and going to prison. And they tend to be many of the high profile, politically energized cases out
Right.
there. The George Zimmerman case, the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Now, those two guys happened to get acquitted, but they were at risk of conviction. They would have spent the rest of their lives in jail. Uh, Derek Chauvin is another case.
Yeah.
There was reasonable doubt in that case, but he got convicted anyway, and he'll die in prison.
George Zimmerman, can you tell me what the media said about it and what actually happened?
Sure. So the way it was portrayed in the media was that George Zimmerman was a white Latino, a phrase invented for his trial.
A white
A white
Latino.
Latino. He was some kind of pseudo white supremacist
Mhm.
who saw a 13-year-old black boy walking through his community and decided to kill him and shot him dead for the crime of that boy walking around minding his own business with iced tea and candy.
Mhm.
What actually happened was George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch volunteer for his community that was beset by a tidal wave of home invasions and burglaries and thefts. He saw Trayvon Martin, who was not 13 years old, but was a 17-year-old, well-muscled high school football player, a
Wait,
street
he was 17?
17.
Okay, keep going.
Trayvon Martin was a street fighter. In other words, he engaged in fights in the street as entertainment. We know this because we have video of him fighting on his own cell phone. His chosen technique was to punch people in the face, knock them down, and then mount them and beat them into the ground. Well, Trayvon Martin saw that George Zimmerman was on the phone with police reporting a suspicious character, Trayvon Martin. So he ambushed George Zimmerman, punched him in the face, knocked him down, mounted him, was beating him into the ground, smashing his head into a sidewalk. There's eyewitness testimony for all of this. And in the last desperate moment to save his life, George Zimmerman drew his legally carried pistol, fired a single round that killed Trayvon Martin in lawful self-defense.
And then there was all these riots and they made it politically motivated. But somehow Zimmerman still got off, like he got acquitted, right?
Yeah, when I first looked at the case, I thought, well, surely there must be something from the prosecution here that would suggest guilt, because everything I'm seeing is totally consistent with lawful self-defense. And there simply wasn't anything.
Mhm.
But what was happening was it became an opportunity for a local prosecutor who was having difficulty getting reelected in her black community.
Oh.
She had prosecuted a couple of cases involving black people that were very unpopular in the community. She was going to lose her reelection. And then she saw the opportunity with George Zimmerman and said, you know what? If I prosecute this
Oh.
guy for shooting that black high school student, I'll be in favor with the black community again. Now, George Zimmerman was acquitted. So that prosecutor lost that trial if you define winning as getting a conviction. She didn't get a conviction.
Mhm.
But if you properly understand what motivated her, it was not to get a conviction. It was to get reelected. And that worked. When she was going to lose reelection, she prosecuted Zimmerman and she got reelected instead of losing. In fact, the prosecutor in George Zimmerman's area,
Mhm.
he was pressured to bring charges against George Zimmerman and he quit. He resigned his job rather than prosecute George Zimmerman. So the prosecutor who ended up taking the case was from a completely different part of Florida,
No
who flew in
way.
to take over that case for political advantage.
How can they do that? Because isn't it based on where you are? I don't
Yeah, but
actually
once
know.
the original prosecutor quit, it left a vacuum. He needed to be replaced by somebody, and she
Oh.
raised her hand and got picked by the
And-
governor.
Oh, so the governor appointed her to go do it?
Essentially assigned her to go into that empty district and take over the prosecutor's
Oh,
role.
and because they made it like a race issue,
Right.
then the facts didn't even matter.
Right. So there's a cliche in the law, and it says if you're a lawyer and the law is on your side, you argue the law to the
Mhm.
jury. And if the facts are on your side, you argue the facts to the jury. And if neither the law nor the facts are on your side, you pound the table. And so that whole prosecution was table pounding. The facts were not on their side. The law was not on their side. It was the cleanest case of self-defense I've ever seen brought to trial. Their prospects of actually getting a conviction was shockingly low, probably just that 10% that's noise in the system. So I don't think they really had an expectation of getting a conviction, although it could, of course, happen.
Mhm.
The whole point was for her to win re-election. And in that respect, she won. So the ultimate merits of the case are hard to know, right?
Yeah.
Whenever this guy did what he was charged with, I wasn't in the room, so I don't really know in any absolute sense what
Yeah.
happened. But I do know that when the defense is saying, hey, we have exculpatory evidence that's favorable to our client, and the state is arguing for that not to be admitted, that's a problem.
Mm. Yeah, because you would think that would be illegal for them not to bring up evidence, right?
At a trial, it would be. It gets a little squishier when we're talking about the appeals process.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a prosecutor and you're genuinely interested in justice and not just
Right.
a score, you seek justice by allowing the evidence in.
Right.
Right. So even when these people are acquitted, like George Zimmerman or Kyle Rittenhouse, so
Right.
they won, right? They're acquitted. They
Mhm.
walk out of the courtroom a free man. They were at risk of conviction.
Mhm.
The trials go on for weeks. And in the case of Zimmerman, it was like a year between the event and the trial.
Mhm.
So think about it. If you're like a 25-year-old guy, you're married, you're going to school, you're working a job, and this happens. And now your lawyer tells you, listen, in a year from now, we're going to go to trial and they're going to decide whether you spend the rest of your life in a cage. What do you do during that year? You still go get your 10 credits that year at the community college? Do you start a family? Do you have a child? Do you do anything substantive? Your life is frozen for that year and you never get that year back. So even if you have the best possible outcome and you get acquitted, you lost that year of your life forever. In the case of George Zimmerman, he lost everything. He lost his job. He lost his wife. He lost, in a sense,
His wife left him?
his wife divorced him.
No way.
And I didn't know George at the time of the trial, but I've come to know George since then. He's just a genuinely nice guy, but he was traumatized.
Wait,
I mean,
you met him?
yeah.
No way.
Yep.
Really? Have you like had an interview with him, or what did? how
Not
do you
not
know him?
online, but I've talked with him about the case. I know the lawyers on his side from the case very, very well.
Wow.
Now they're good friends of mine. But George was, so you hear about George after the trial, after the acquittal. Sometimes you'd see him in the news. He did something crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was a broken man.
Right.
He had PTSD from that experience. You know, he wanted to be a prosecutor himself. That's what he was going to school for. And so in his own mind, he's the good guy, right? He wants to be a good guy in society, keep society safe from evil predators. And the system tried to put him in a cage for the rest of his life for doing nothing wrong. And how long do you think George Zimmerman would have survived in general population in a Florida prison? Had he been convicted of being a racist murderer of a 13-year-old black boy for having iced tea and candy? Weeks, maybe.
What about Kyle Rittenhouse?
Another case that was, there was literally zero evidence inconsistent with self-defense. And that's important to keep in mind because you don't have to prove you acted in self-defense. The state has to prove you did not act in self-defense. And they have to prove that beyond any reasonable doubt. So by like 90% of the evidence, they have to disprove your claim of self-defense. Well, if 100% of the evidence is favorable to self-defense, there's no way they can get a conviction on the legal merits there. Kyle Rittenhouse didn't shoot anybody who was not actively trying to kill him in the moment he shot that person.
Right.
Every single one of those uses of force was completely lawful. The prosecution had nothing to go on the law and on the facts. So what did they do? They pounded the table. They made a bunch of smoke and mirrors. They complained about him carrying a rifle in the first place. Sorry, that was completely lawful under the circumstances. They just shout about a lot of things. But there was nothing there in the merits. So Kyle Rittenhouse got lucky. He could have been convicted too. It would have been a wrongful conviction, but it could have happened. Thankfully, the jury came back with the right verdict.
So, do you think all of these cases are disincentivizing men from stepping up in situations where they hypothetically could? So, Kyle Rittenhouse, I'm fairly certain he actually went there to help.
He went there to help.
Yeah, so he went
He
there
had
to
medical
help.
training. He brought his first aid kit.
Yeah.
He was treating people's cuts and abrasions and things like that.
And, for, I don't know how long the trial was, but he probably had to put his life on hold. He probably had death threats. Oh, yeah. And Breonna Taylor is another one I have listed.
Breonna Taylor kind of falls into the category of what I call bad outcome cases, meaning you can imagine a shooting that might occur where the person who was killed really deserved it, really had it coming. They were firing bullets at the police and the police were shooting back and they just got killed in a gunfight. That's not really what happened with Breonna Taylor. She was in an apartment with her boyfriend. The apartment was served with a search warrant by the police. They were doing a drug raid, essentially. The police kicked in the door, as the search warrant allowed them to do. And when they came in, Breonna's boyfriend started shooting at the police. He would later say that he thought he was being the victim of a home invasion, which could be true. Maybe he did believe that. In which case, it can be lawful to shoot at the police. If you don't know they're police, if you think they're home invaders, you're just defending your home. But of course, when you shoot at the police, they tend to shoot back. And the police did shoot back, and one of those rounds struck and killed Breonna Taylor. Was she trying to harm the police? No. Did the police have a reasonable expectation that the person they were serving the warrant on was trying to kill them? Yes. So their shots fired in her direction at the source of the gun shooting at them was a lawful use of force. She just got caught in the crossfire. So it's not a good death. I mean, nobody wanted her to die. But a lot of times you have these cases where it's technically a legal killing under the law, even though everybody involved wish it had never happened.
Okay, so you were saying Breonna Taylor was awful. They're said in the chat, it's
Right.
awful but lawful.
Yep, that's the phrase we use. So it's not good, but it happens all the time because two people could be involved in a fight and they both legitimately think they're acting in self-defense. This happens a lot with police on police shootings, where they
Police
each
on
mistake the
police?
other, especially if they're in plain clothes. They're both in plain clothes. They're being told, hey, go find a guy who's walking around with a gun. And they turn a corner and there's a guy with a gun. It's another cop. And they shoot at each other. One of them kills the other. Under the law, the law of self-defense doesn't really care about what was actually happening. It's all about what was your reasonable perception when you fired that shot. And if you had a reasonable perception that you were facing an imminent deadly force threat, you can use deadly force in self-defense. You're not required to be correct in that assessment. We're not required to make perfect decisions in self-defense. We're only required to make reasonable decisions in self-defense. Mistakes are allowed as long as the mistakes are reasonable mistakes.
So they're not reasonable doubt.
The law doesn't really care what weapon you use. It cares a lot about the amount of force you're using. So the law of self-defense puts force into two buckets. There's non-deadly force, force not likely to cause death or serious bodily injury, and there's deadly force, which means more than death that can kill you. It means force that can cause death or serious bodily injury. So a maiming injury, a broken bone, that's deadly force, even if you would never have died from it. So once you're in the deadly force bucket, you're being threatened with deadly force and you're using deadly force in self-defense, the law doesn't care how you do that. It could be using a knife. It could be using a gun. It could be running someone over with your car. It could be something from the Wile E. Coyote cartoons where you drop a piano from a great height onto their head. It doesn't really matter. The law cares a lot about whether the conditions for deadly force have been met, but it doesn't really care a lot about what form the deadly force takes.
What do you think's the worst case you've seen in the media where would you, because for me it'd be Derek Chauvin. Would that be the worst one you've seen in terms of like innocent guy getting put in jail?
No, because I see a lot of bad ones. There was one recently, I believe the officer's name was Aaron Dean, police officer. He's called to a house in the middle of the night, burglary in progress. It's the winter. All the doors are open in the house, so it looks like it's been ransacked. He shows up there, and the first thing he's been trained to do is first search the outside of the house, make sure there's not people lurking. So he's walking around the outside of the house with his flashlight. He peers into a window of the house, and on the other side of the window, someone's pointing a gun at him. So he has his own gun in his hand because he's looking for a burglar, and he shoots. It turns out the person inside the house was the resident of the house. It was a young black woman who lived in the house. She probably thought it was the burglar, a burglar outside the house, right? That she was pointing the gun at. And this is a classic example of a shooting I would say was awful, but lawful, right? She didn't need to die. She wasn't doing anything criminal. But did he have a reasonable perception based on the information he knew that he was facing an imminent, unlawful, deadly force threat? He did. And he got convicted. And I think that was a horribly unjust conviction.
Oh, he went to jail?
Yeah, he's in jail right now.
No.
Another case just happened very recently.
Before you go, was there a robber in that one?
No.
Oh, there wasn't even
No.
So she just thought there was and there wasn't.
He was searching around the outside of the house. She probably heard him walking around outside. It's 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. So she probably thought, holy cow, there's somebody sneaking around outside my house.
But she wasn't the one who called the cops because she was...
No, the neighbors across the street called the cops because they called. They said, hey, we're looking at our neighbor's house. All the windows and doors are open. We think there's a burglary going on. Can you send a cop to check it out?
She just
because it's the middle of winter, 2 a.m., and the doors are open.
Why were they open?
I don't think we ever knew, actually.
Maybe she's smoking weed or something. I don't know.
Well, who knows? You know,
that's the
people
only
like
reason
to
I
smoke
could.
funny things.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the only reason I could think of.
Or maybe they burned something in the kitchen. They opened up the doors and then they fell asleep or passed out or whatever and forgot the doors were open. Who knows? There was another case recently, just this year in Wisconsin, the Apple River stabbing case. Nikolai Mew was 50-ish, fat, quadruple bypass heart patient, floating on the river with his wife and some friends. One of his friends lost their cell phone in a little floaty bag, so he wandered around looking for it. got into close proximity of some very drunk and high school boys who started taunting him. The taunting turned into a fight. They were beating him into the river, 13-1. And when he came out of the river, he came out with a pocket knife. And basically, they threw themselves onto his knife. He stabbed, I think it was 3 people, one of them fatally. He didn't stab anyone who wasn't attacking him, but he was brought to trial and he was convicted. And I think that was a completely unjust conviction. I think he had more than a reasonable perception that he was facing an unlawful, deadly force fight, that he was going to die in that river if he didn't take out that knife and defend himself. But nevertheless, he's convicted. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison.
Was it on camera? What was his name?
It was. It was caught because the tubers all had their phones out.
Wow, the system really, if it gets politicized, that seems to be like the kiss of death, is when politics become involved.
Well, it certainly means you're in a fight for your life. So it doesn't mean you'll be convicted. Zimmerman wasn't convicted. Rittenhouse wasn't convicted. But it certainly ups the stakes, and you're definitely going to trial. So it's very common in a killing case where a self-defender has been charged with murder or manslaughter to spend in excess of $200,000 before you even get to trial. And then it just goes up from there.
But if they don't have the money, where does it come from?
You get a public defender.
And those guys are really overworked, right?
They're overworked is the fair way to put it. They get a bad reputation, like they're bad lawyers. They're not bad lawyers. In fact, I would advise anyone who's thinking about going into the law, if you want trial experience, become a public defender. You'll get more trial experience there than anywhere else in the world. If you join a private firm, you won't see the inside of a courtroom for years. If you're a public defender, you'll be in a courtroom all day, every day of the week. Often they're the best lawyers, but they are way overworked. Instead of having 1 client or 5 clients at a time, they have 50 or 100. It's unmanageable.
And so I'm guessing more people can be put in jail like unjustly then because they're overworked. That's part of the process. They just don't have the time.
So, a trial is a war. It's a battle. And just like any other war, how many resources you can bring to the fight matters, right? If you had 2 nations and one of them had 1 million people and one of them had 100 million people, it's not hard to predict who's going to win.
Right. That's an interesting way.
By the way, the prosecutor knows this, right? The prosecutor can see whether or not you have a public defender or an expensive private lawyer. He knows how many resources you have.
Wow. It's so interesting because we grow up thinking that the justice system is fair. And I guess it's probably more fair than some parts of the world, I'd imagine.
I think it's the best system anywhere.
Yeah.
But it still has profound defects.
Yeah.
Because it's run by humans.
Right. So do you think that money buys freedom then by that?
I think it's better to have more resources than fewer resources.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's such a lawyer answer. Sorry, that's such a good one. Okay. Is there anything else important that you think the audience should know about self-defense that maybe we...
Yeah, they should get my free book, Law of Self-Defense Principles. Most people read it in an afternoon. And again, it's free. Get it at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. Check it out on Amazon. It's got 1,500 reviews. It's 5-star rated, but don't buy it on Amazon because they'll charge you, I think it's $20 or $25 for the book, plus shipping and handling. We only ask you to cover the cost of sending the book to you. The book itself is free. Lawofselfdefense.com/free book.